Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Welcome sa isa na namang episode ng online series ni Inang Pamantasan kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hanggan. Ito ang PNU Talks. I am Manicio from the PNU Faculty of Arts and Languages, your learning from home buddy for today. For this episode, entitled On Learning How to Teach, I would like to share more about strategies, learning experiences in language methods courses where beginning teachers or teachers in the beginning of their teacher development start to learn more how to teach. These are the language teaching methods courses. And these strategies we label as reflective pedagogies. And you'll know more about that as I share with you some of these practices. But first, it's important to start with the intention, the goal of the episode. So I am actually posing a few questions to you, our viewers. So the topic is on learning how to teach. And so as I begin the episode, I'd like to ask pre-service teachers, if you're a pre-service teacher, how do you approach learning how to teach? What learning experiences in your coursework help you learn more about teaching and also about learning? For the in-service teachers, teachers already in practice, how do you approach your continuing learning how to teach? Because of course, teachers, we do not stop learning. And as we gain more real experiences in the classroom, I think we become better, we become wiser, we just continue improving. So, what classroom experiences help you improve your practice? How do you work with others toward improving practices? I think these are important questions to ask ourselves, maybe while listening to the episode or even after watching the episode. Um, the context of learning how to teach in my presentation is the methods courses. Methods courses where I try my best to employ reflective pedagogies. So, my fellow teacher educators, I'm giving you these questions. How do you approach teaching how to teach? What are your philosophies in teaching prospective teachers? What instructional materials do you find practicable in teaching methods courses? So I hope I get to share a few ideas and maybe you get to relate to also some of the practices I will share because it's the same, it might be the same thing that you also do in your own methods course classroom. So since we are talking about the methods course, it's important to first define what we mean by these courses. So in my context, I belong to the English education curriculum. So our methods courses are language teaching methods courses. These courses cover theories, pragmatic concepts, methodology on how English language skills can be taught and learned. So, for the language area, these courses concentrate on the teaching of language skills, listening, viewing, speaking, reading, writing, literature, even multiliteracies. It can include grammar instruction, instructional materials development, and assessment. So what about the other term? So those are the methods courses. That's where I situate the examples I will provide. What about reflective pedagogies? So if we think about reflective pedagogies, we think about reflective practice, reflective practitioners. So the intention is really to develop among our teacher learners reflective practitioners who possess critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making skills necessary for designing and implementing learning experiences. Uh, so these practitioners are informed, self inquiring, and adaptive. And so from these ideas, we can infer or we can put together these concepts and think of reflective practice pedagogies in the methods course as some strategies, approaches where we can meld conceptual understandings, situate theory, application, and consider teaching learning context. And so, usually in a methods course where we promote reflective practice, the learning experiences include collaborative reflection, dialogic interaction, and of course, authentic tasks. So, given these, I came up with three basic principles if we want to really employ reflective pedagogies in preparing our teacher learners to become reflective practitioners. One is use thinking driven approaches in understanding the concepts. And these concepts are language teaching related concepts. Also, equally important that every time in our discussion in the tasks, we connect these to the realities of practice. So, when I ask my student teachers who are doing their practicum, it's a common reaction that when they finally, get to teach real students and they get to be in control or in charge of the real classroom, that's where the complexity becomes real, and sometimes they get overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, this is so different from what we talked about in the class, in the methods course class. This is so different from what I read. My lesson plan is so nice, so good, but when I implemented it, only 30% of it I was able to employ because the rest I had to just spend time managing the class. And so it's important that when we are learning these theories, these methodologies, we are connecting them, we are making sense of them to or through thinking about realities of practice. And then the third is the importance of listening to teacher learners' voices, their beliefs, their experiences, what they bring in the learning experience. So it's not only the teacher as the sole source of concepts, of beliefs, of theories. I have realized that we can learn so much from our teacher learners. And so, what I will do is first focus on the first two. So, one and two first, thinking driven approach to presentation of concepts. So, we can design activities, discussions that involve problem solving, problem posing, decision making, and reflecting on practice. The other is connecting to realities of practice by situating concepts in teaching learning contexts. And these teaching learning contexts include our understanding of who Filipino teachers are, who Filipino learners are, what they need, their backgrounds, their motivations, their interests. Also looking into the local curriculum, learning spaces, teaching learning environments in our context, and in our area, English education, rule of language and languages. Of course, a very practical strategy to really connect concepts, theories to realities of practice would be to use authentic text. And that would include the curriculum guide, for example, the lesson plan templates in-service teachers are using in practice, and the actual assessment tools that are being used in real classrooms. And so I will first focus on these two by presenting or sharing with you some strategies, some materials, activities that I do in my methods courses, where I think there is thinking driven strategies, or my students are engaged in thinking driven activities. And as much as I can, I try to connect these tasks and concepts to realities of practice. So here goes. First, so I am sharing here a small group discussion worksheet. My students work in small groups. This is for one methods course. And our topic for this particular activity is on learner factors. So learner attitudes and attributes. So instead of immediately just discussing what are the learner attributes or attitudes, giving a lecture on it, we discuss the concepts by solving problems. And these problems are actually real life dilemma that I have gathered after interacting with or communicating with real teachers. So these are actually real problems. So with my conversations with in-service teachers, they would tell me, okay, these are my concerns. Like number one, many of the learners do not consider English skills as important to real life. So question is, how do I convince them that English proficiency is necessary? And then we'll take a look at number three. This one is very relatable. Most of my learners do not like reading. How do I make them interested in ESL or second language reading? So we pose this problem questions, and then my students in small groups discuss and come up with intended solutions. But apart from the possible solutions that that come up with, they will also identify specific challenges that they might encounter if they are to follow or carry out that particular solution. So then after discussing ideas, sharing ideas, that's where we draw the concepts on learner factors like age, motivation, aptitude, and we draw the concepts from the discussions and insights that we get also from solving these not anymore imaginary problems, because these are real problems coming from real teachers. So what EL teachers want to know, what English language teachers want to know. Here's another activity that we do in our classroom. Let me just, okay, give me a second. All right, sorry about that. So we do task analysis. So this is more of an inductive way of, again, discussing concepts. So for example, our topic here is principles in teaching speaking. Well, listening, speaking, viewing. And so instead of immediately enumerating all the principles in teaching speaking, or enumerating and explaining the different methodologies that we can employ when teaching speaking, we start our discussion with analyzing materials extracts. So these materials extracts can be a task sheet, a worksheet, a pedagogical article, or a professional reading that features an activity, or I share some materials that I have used while teaching my other students, or analyzing parts of a lesson plan. So I select a materials extract, and then my instruction for the teacher learners is to note their observations about the features of the activity that is featured in the material or the article. We use guide questions because eventually, after uh, giving them a quick walkthrough in the material of the material, they will highlight or identify features of the task, for example, that they think contribute to the development of a skill. So some guide questions include, what features of the task contribute to the development of speaking skills? And then what can we infer about principles in teaching speaking, or what can we infer about how speaking should be taught? And then the last step is to connect the principles inferred by my students to professional theories. So I'll show you how we do it. So as one example, so, for example, this one is an article from English Teaching Forum, which features a speaking activity, a fluency-based speaking activity that will be done by students in small groups. So, consensus building activity. They will students need to decide on who among the list of volunteers they will send to the moon for a mission. So the activity has steps. No? It's a speaking task that prepares the learners for a writing activity, actually. So we do a quick walkthrough. We look at the steps, we look at the objectives of the task, we look at the features, the task sheets, the worksheets, the info sheets that go with the activity. So after that, so students are instructed to take note of these features, right? So what we do next is to ask, what I do next is to ask them, what features of the task do you think can contribute to developing speaking skills? And next, what can we infer about how speaking should be taught? In that particular task, my students gave me these responses. This one is coming from 2-1. So number one, they said provide steps. So it was obvious, evident in the activity, step 1, 2, 3, 4. So they find that it's important to provide steps or phases in structuring the speaking task, to create opportunities where students can speak freely, provide interactive activities where students get to interact in pairs or in small groups, and then of course address different functions of speaking. So I would record all their responses, their inferences about principles in teaching speaking. And what we do next is to consult professional theories and conceptual theories. So we refer to our course learning resource. For example, here, a book by David Noonan, and he has a chapter on teaching speaking where he also enumerates key principles for teaching speaking. Now, what is really interesting is that when we put my students' list of principles alongside Noonan's key principles for teaching speaking, they are very much parallel, right? So even before my students saw the list of principles from Noonan, they were already able to infer the appropriate principles in teaching speaking. So like group and pair and group work, functions of speaking, what else? Opportunities the students can be comfortable to communicate freely. So parallel principles. So when I present the principles from Noonan, it's like affirming uh, the inferences of my teacher learners. Now, of course, there are times when the principles they will infer might be a misconception, for example. So it's also an opportunity, in presenting the professional theories and concepts, conceptual literature. It's also an opportunity to address and clarify some misconceptions. But I think the inductive process is very much thinking driven, and since we are actually analyzing a professional reading that more likely is based on a real teacher's classroom experience, so there is also connection to realities of practice. Let me show you another activity that we do, reflective pedagogies in the methods course. We have here lesson plan critiquing. I'm sure if you're a pre-service teacher, you're an in-service teacher, you must have done lesson plan critiquing back in college and in college. And if you're a teacher educator, I'm sure you have done lesson plan critiquing, or you have asked your students to do this. So in the lesson plan critiquing, of course, we analyze the features, the principles evident in the activities in the lesson plan. But when I ask my students to critique a lesson plan, I add to me, an important column, the third column here, adaptation. So, to me, it connects to the realities of practice. It's not just critiquing the instructional plan, but thinking about it, problematizing it, no, in a sense. So, for example, in this task sheet, I give my students 4 options. These are 4 lesson plans written by teachers, other teachers. But these are foreign lesson plans, and in this particular lesson our topic is teaching listening, speaking, and viewing. So they will analyze a lesson plan that addresses listening, speaking, and viewing skills. So their task is, one, to identify the principles in teaching, which we discuss in class, because of course this is also a way of assessment, no? So they will provide a brief explanation on how the principles are evident in the lesson activities. So the first and second column, it's like an extension of our discussion in class and somehow a checking of understanding. But the third one, I'd like them to connect to practice. So I ask them to describe adaptation. So describe lesson adaptation by answering the question, if you were to adapt the listening, viewing, and or speaking activities in our context, what will you change? You can add, delete, and or replace components of the tasks. So why do I say it connects to practice? Let me show you a sample output. So this one is done by Celine, Catherine, and Trisha. They are from 3-2 BE. So they selected a lesson plan entitled Exploring Michigan. Okay, so Michigan, it's a foreign place. But the idea is there's a speaking activity where students in pairs or groups create an itinerary if they are to bring a friend to the hometown, Michigan. So the negotiating the itinerary activity. So of course, first, Celine, Catherine, and Trisha were able to identify the principles in teaching speaking that are evident in the activity. So for example, providing opportunities to engage in pair work, limiting teacher talk, um, addressing language functions, and then incorporating real world tasks in the lesson. But to me, the more interesting part, apart from the successful identification of the principles, is the adaptation column. So, the in the original lesson plan, so the students will make an itinerary in the local place. Or here in the lesson plan, it's Michigan. So, what Celine, Catherine, and Trisha plan to do is for still do the group activity, but here the students will represent a must-see place in Manila, of course, and they are going to not just create instead of creating an itinerary, they are going to do an advertisement on why that place is worth visiting. And then there would be exchange of information in the task. So there it's not only the adaptation is not only localizing or contextualizing it because from Michigan it became a must-see place in Manila, but also modifying the format and presentation of the task. Instead of creating or planning an itinerary, they are to produce an advertisement. So there's it became somehow more creative, yeah, in a way. So I like looking at the third column when I check these particular tasks. So it's an added component in critiquing the lesson plan to connect the theories, the principles to practice. Okay. I'm sorry, but okay, I'm skipping that slide. So let's go to this one, lesson planning. Of course, we do lesson planning in methods courses, right? I mean, it's in the methods course that we write a lot of lesson plans. But here, well, usually when we give lesson planning activities, we provide our teacher learners procedure. Okay, these are the parts of the lesson plan. Or we give them a list of target competencies and they are to unpack and then create a lesson plan for it. So, what I do to really engage them in a lot of thinking and decision making and problem solving and connect the task to realities of practice, I add context as an important component of the lesson plan. So, for example, if you look at the second column, the one highlighted in yellow, there is an educational setting. So this lesson plan is for grade 10 English. But when the students plan the lesson, they have to consider that they are planning it for a particular group of students in a particular educational setting. So here, 45 students in a public junior high school and a city school, and you have limited classroom space. So we can be more detailed with the setting, like what equipment are available in the classroom. We can add more details to that, and then of course the next row, the one the green box, the green row, I also add a language learners profile. So you have 45 students in a public junior high school in the city, you have limited classroom space, and your learners are limited English proficient. So they're limited English proficient, and these are the things that they can do, or these are the things that they can only do at the moment with language. So they have limited vocabulary. They can use and understand simple, memorized written English with visual support. They can use and understand single words and or chunks in oral discourse or speaking. So this context being described, that's the starting point of the planning. So their decisions with regard to the text that they will use, their decisions on the format of the activities that they will use, the strategies, the amount of language based support they will provide, the amount of guidance or control, teacher control they will provide, it will depend on this context, who the learners are and where they are situated, what's the educational setting. So, of course, the usual objective, subject matter, learning resources, and procedure of the plan. Now, the last row, the row in blue, to me is an equally important part of the lesson planning task, which is reflection. The reflection part is not reflection on, okay, how was it uh, doing the lesson plan, like how will you describe the experience in preparing the lesson plan. No, the reflection still relates on their instructional planning decisions. So the instruction here is briefly discuss rationale behind significant instructional decisions in the lesson plan. So they reflect on why they made those decisions, what supports those instructional decisions. So I'll give you an example response. So this one is the reflection part of a lesson on adverbs for grade 10 English, a lesson for limited English proficient junior high school students. So the teacher learners who prepared the lesson are Jana Bell and John Erica of 3-1 BEE. So in their reflection, they decided to explain more about why they chose comics as the text for their grammar lesson. So they are saying, given the language profile of learners, so limited English proficient, so if they use comics as the reading material for the grammar lesson, it will help learners visualize the dialogues where adverbs occur. It will not overwhelm students because the written English is relatively short utterances, because the comics would show conversations, right? And then it will also aid, they are saying, students to realize how the adverbs are used in natural communication. Using comics will make the activity, the lesson, interactive, engaging, and relatable. Right? And we agree. And then they even detailed here their criteria for selecting the comics, that the comics must not have vulgar content, must not contain sensitive content, be understandable with simple language, and very important, adverbs, right? So the adverbs should occur, or adverb phrases should be there in the comic strip. Okay, so, or in the comics. So seeing that, illustrate how the principles are are applied. Not only that, but the decisions, no, the decisions that relate to lesson planning, the decisions they made with regard to their instructional planning, really considered the context earlier that we were describing here, right? So it's not just, okay, let's apply the methodology, let's apply the principles, but how are we going to apply it appropriately, in a way that it's needs based, that it is also context based. So again, thinking driven, and then connecting to realities of practice. So those two. And then, as I said earlier, I have three, right? And the third one is this: listening to teacher learners' voices. And I said earlier, it's important to know what their beliefs are, what their relevant learning experiences are. You see, their experiences as learners inform a lot of their insights, especially if they are in the beginning stages of their teacher development, in the pre-service teachers level. They rely a lot on their experiences as learners. So even in discussing some topics in class, a lot of times we recall what was it like in the English class, and we recall the good and bad experiences. We remember fondly the best English teachers we've had in elementary and high school, who inspired us to become English teachers too. We also remember the not so good experiences in the English class, and all that makes sense. We can make sense of all those experiences and relate them to the learning of how to teach. And so, that third principle, which is the importance of listening to teacher learners, I have realized after having taught methods courses so many times, and have after having interacted a lot with student teachers. So often I have to admit there are frustrating times, because when I reflect, on my practices, there are many instances when I really question my own strategies. I'm questioning whether they work or they don't at all, because sometimes I feel like I have provided a lot of lecture. I have provided them all the reading materials they will need. I have given them examples. I have modeled some strategies. But when they do their demo teaching or they submit to me their lesson plan, still I'd feel like there's something missing. There's something lacking. So my realization is that for the most part, my frustration was because I was only listening to myself. This is what you need to learn. This is how to do it. This is how speaking should be taught. These are the principles in teaching speaking. When there is an equally important voice, and that voice is of my students. And so, I'd like us to listen this time to teacher learners' voices. Recently I attended one workshop, and in a small group discussion, we were asked this question: what kind of educator do I want to be? So, what kind of educator do I want to be? And so, reflecting on that question, my answer was I want to be a listener. I want to be that kind of educator who listens, not just to myself, but who listens to my learners. And so today, I invite you to join me in listening to teacher learners' voices. So let's head over to the next part of this episode. Please watch this. And welcome to the second part of this PNU Talks episode on learning how to teach. I'm so happy, I'm so thrilled to be joined here today by my teacher learners. Remember, I have been emphasizing the third principle, which is really the importance of listening to your teacher learners. And this conversation is the very reason why I am telling you that it's really valuable. So I hope we all enjoy this little conversation that I'm having with my teacher learners. And I'm excited for you to get to know them. So can you please very quickly introduce yourselves? Let's start with you, Abby.
Hi, good day everyone. I am Abby Joy. I am a PEE major, and I am so elated to be part of this PEE Talks episode.
Wow, elated. Are you as elated, Nicole?
Yes, ma'am.
So please greet
Hello,
our
everyone.
viewers.
So I'm Nicole Jastir Musura, also from BE majorship, and I'm also very excited to talk with everyone and share my insights on learning, teaching.
Thank you, Nicole. Laura?
Hello everyone. My name is Laura Lay from BE21. I'm very honored to be a part of this talk with, I'm sure, very good teacher learners as well.
Matthew?
All right, the name is John Matthew Magsisi. You can call me JM for short, and I am excited to be a part of this episode. And I would like beforehand to give my gratitude to you, Professor, for inviting us here in order to share our knowledge, insights, and experiences as we continue to learn together.
Wow, thank you, Matthew. Marcy?
Hi, I'm Mark from BE22, and I'm so honored to be here.
And finally, Pat?
And last but not least, I am Patrick Forlegan from 2T, also BE, and I'm also excited and somewhat nervous to be part of this PE Talks.
So don't be nervous. Okay, so in this conversation, I think it's important to note that it's all about learning from each other, right? So I have prepared a few questions for you, and I think as you answer and as you share your experiences and insights, our viewers will also be able to relate and even learn more. So my first question here is for Abby and Nicole. Because this term, you're in your second year in the English education program, you are taking up one of your first methods courses, your pedagogical content knowledge courses. And I'm sure many of our pre-service teachers who are viewing this episode are in the same stage as you. So how do you find learning how to teach? Let's start with you, Abby.
Hi, okay. So actually, I find it both challenging and fun. Because first, challenging because I realize that you will never be prepared or equipped with teaching. Like for example, while you are prepared or introduced to a lot of foundations of learning, theories in SLA, you will be faced with unexpected events in the classroom. So for instance, aside from being equipped to teach my major, English, you should also be prepared to deal with a diverse behavior of your students.
That's true.
So in addition, you will also be dealing with different students' interests, level of proficiency in English, or different learning needs. So you will also have to take into account those factors.
Yeah.
So aside from taking those factors into account, like behavior, you should also be flexible in designing strategies that would allow the students to easily comprehend the lesson, or how will they retain these pieces of information for a long time.
Yeah.
So yes, and next, I think challenging because I came to a realization that teaching indeed requires a systematic and logical process. So, for instance, in reading, you cannot just ask your students to immediately start with a reading task. It requires, for example, building a schema.
Yeah.
So yes. So however, I also find it fun because teaching made me enter to a lot of doors of opportunity to learn. Because I know something that I will be meeting a diverse set of students with varying needs,
Yeah.
learning needs, interest, and that opportunity will allow me to continuously redesign my strategies that are apt to their needs.
Yeah, so I like the idea of recognizing the complexity of it. But that's where the fun is, right? That planning is not structured, not linear. Planning is not linear, and there are many complex considerations. Thank you for that, Abby. So, learning how to teach is complex. How about you, Nicole? But fun. Nicole, how about you?
Yes, ma'am. So I totally agree with what Abby have said that teaching or learning how to teach is very enjoying, or rather, it is hard, but you need to master it because it is really needed. So for me, I think that our first method course was a huge step in understanding the different teaching processes and principles
Yes.
that takes place in planning a class. As Abby have said, we need to really plan the different activities that we will be using. So I can see that although learning how to teach requires extensive reading of materials,
Of course.
our PELT resources, I can say that I endured and I enjoyed the journey of learning, teaching.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. So it's important that we recognize it's complex. We understand that it is a rigorous process. It requires a lot of thinking and planning, but it's also fun because you're preparing it for others, our target learners. And so you can just imagine how it would feel like if you see how the lesson plan will come to life, how it will succeed, and also how it will fail. Sometimes we see opportunities also when we see how the lesson plan while we implementing it just breaks down. Because, as Abby was saying earlier, classrooms are complex, learners are diverse. Okay, thank you, Abby and Nicole. My next question this time is for Laura and Pat. Because what makes this batch, what makes you teacher learners different from the rest is that you are starting to learn how to teach online. Like there's no face-to-face opportunity to do the demonstration teaching or to see how certain activities are modeled. Everything is being done online. So Laura and Pat, what do you find worthwhile and what do you also find challenging learning how to teach online? Maybe we can start with Laura.
Well, firstly, it's vastly different from the traditional method of, communicating with the teacher and the students in front of each other. So there's a natural, organic, almost personal way of delivery between the students and the teachers. But online, I think, as you had, Abby and Nicole had said, there's an amount of discovery. So it's more exploratory in nature because we're basically in our own rooms in some parts of our houses, trying to figure out what the teacher is telling us, or how we're able to deliver on what expected of us. So exploratory, I think that's one
Word.
impression in me, because yes, you're trying to look for new ways online and innovative. So before, if I imagine learning how to teach, I would think, oh, I would just be given textbooks or
Yeah.
notebooks, and I would just write down and try to emulate the teacher that I'm
Yeah.
seeing. But now you're limited with the class interaction with the teacher because of online limitations. So we can also explore online. Oh, I have learned this strategies, approaches. So it's exploratory and innovative. Challenging. There's a lot, but maybe the building rapport between the teacher and the learners, because sometimes I mean, keeping the human element of learning process is important.
True.
But if you're always facing the laptop or
That's
device,
true.
sometimes there's the personalization.
Yes.
So I think it's good if the professor or teachers, they have this effort to present themselves there emotionally, which is a bit difficult because we get tired. We're humans.
Yes.
I don't know if you feel that same way.
And it's remote physically, right? Even if we're now seeing each other, we still feel that distance. But I like the idea of exploratory. When you're doing things online and on your own, you are forced to be self-directed, to be more autonomous, strategic learner, right? And if you think about it on how you are learning how to teach and becoming strategic in the process, yeah, that's a good one we can appreciate about online learning. But I do also admit the limitations with the challenge that you just mentioned. Pat, do you share the same sentiments, learning how to teach online?
Same thing with that. What's worthwhile in the setup that we have, the online learning and teaching, that is the materials available are quite what do you call, what's the word for that?
Overwhelming.
Yeah, in a way overwhelming with that. What we need in our courses are there, but also that it's kind of limited, that we have to filter out in terms of materials that we are going to present, and what the students are to present is, we have to filter out those things, because some factors that we should look into are the dates that it was published. Sometimes it's outdated, and how aligned the materials are to our setup, the online setup, and also what's worthwhile is innovativeness and the creativity of us as students and the teachers, in how we present our and how we approach a task. Some in the traditional setup, because we are presented with Manila papers and whatnot, but here we have animated presentations and whatnot. And then on the challenging side of the online setup is, we could put some limelight on the isolated part of being in the setup. I mean, you're faced with the students and you're facing the teachers, but it's only a skin. There's like it's limited in terms of sensation of being in a classroom that we are used to.
Wow.
It's like we have to adapt to another new normal in that case.
Wow. Yeah, it made me miss the sensation that you feel inside the classroom. But Pat, that's connected to what Laura is saying, right? In the online setup, we are overwhelmed, maybe info overload. We are given a lot of resources. But I think the idea of, that we are being prompted to filter the essentials, be able to know which ones we need, which ones we do not. It's, I think, another kind of life skill and learning skill that is called for in the future. It's a future skill, right? And maybe this transition to full online learning is preparing us for that. But as we slowly transition to face, we keep what we learn from our online learning experiences. Thank you, Pat and Laura. Those are very insightful. Now I have another question here, and this time this is for Marcy and Matthew. Let's talk about the method scores, which is really focusing on learning how to teach English, how to teach language skills. Which learning experiences in these methods courses do you find helpful in your learning how to teach? And why do you consider these experiences helpful? We'll start with Marcy. Marcy?
Um, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Uh, so, for me, every topic that our professor discussed were all they they were all helpful. But if I were to choose one, it would be the experience of learning the principles of teaching, listening, viewing, speaking, reading, and writing. Another factor is that I love how our professor acknowledges the answers of my classmates, and also how interactive it is because while we were commenting the answers, our professor would type on the PowerPoint real time. So it's very commendable. So I learned so much from these discussions about the strategies on how to make learning exciting and creative for students. So I also want to point out how beneficial our worksheets are in the course because we have to assume being educators most of the time and to come up with various activities based on the principles. So in a sense, the principles of teaching the important skills in English language classroom have become somehow a guiding principle for me for when I become an English teacher myself in the future. Actually, had I known this when I was a freshman, I think I would have added this on one of our the requirements in our profit class. I would have added the principles. So that's it.
Yeah, so the idea of inferring the principles and the idea of owning it in a sense because you were actually the ones who figured them out. It's not something immediately given to us. Let's read David Noonan. Let's read Jack Richards. Let's read all these theories and concepts and methodologies. But we figured it out. You figured it out yourselves. No? So there's some ownership to that learning. Thank you for that, Marcy. How about you, Matthew?
I share the same sentiments actually with Marcy, but I'm gonna deviate a little bit from her answer. Actually, the whole course is memorable for me. It's arguably my favorite out of all the English courses. I'm not bootlicking here or anything, but for me, it's because of its complexity and how every activity is significant. It's like you can bring it with you even up until you retire as an educator. Yeah, like my favorite part is when we analyze the lesson plans. We put into practice the principles of teaching. We analyze the lesson plans, activities such as in our class, the one where we let our students imagine they're having a road trip to Michigan. That's probably my favorite one. Projects and such that gives you an insight on what works for in the classroom, what works for these kinds of students, and what does not work, and what can be done to improve on it. I am a firm believer of learning through experience, especially in language teaching. It's hard to memorize. It's better you acquire the skills, and we learn here in this course progressively, and we learn through the experiences of other teachers as well as students, which manifested in these activities. And we probe into the various tools, and just like that was mentioned earlier about teaching, which is a complex but fun, that's the thrill of teaching, that one may or may not have encountered back when we were still studying in elementary and high school, and even maybe our teachers before, they probably may not have encountered this. It gives you a sense of what can be done better in the long game for the education of the future generations, and that's probably my favorite part. It's the practicality of the course.
Exactly. Pragmatic, practical, real life. I think that makes the methods courses, which are on learning how to teach, really meaningful. When you said you can carry with you until you retire, It prepares you for the real battle. It prepares you for real life. And I think the exciting part also is that there's creation part. When you
I
are
agree,
planning
ma'am.
a lesson, you are making decisions. You are preparing and planning learning experiences. And when you do that, you consider a lot of factors, the principles, the context, the learners, your own beliefs, your own learning experiences, what worked for you. So all these elements you put together, and then there's this grand plan that you create. It can be tedious sometimes, but if the planning excited you, I think the implementing of the lesson plan will even be more exciting. So I cannot wait that you get to experience that, trying it out, demonstrating it live face to face, not just with your peers, but in front of real students. And just imagine the satisfaction if they get what you were teaching them, if they produce the output you're expecting them to produce. That's where it becomes really worth it. Okay, now for my last question, which I would like all of you to answer. What do you tell now students like you who are just beginning to learn how to teach? And perhaps in this episode, a number of them are watching us. What should they keep in mind? So, a piece of advice to a fellow teacher learner. Let's start with you, Abby.
Okay, so even though that I am still in my second year, I am imagining myself how will I become a great teacher. So I would say that it is always important to always go back to the basics. So, for instance, when we have no idea how to teach writing or how to teach reading or simply preparing a writing task, one of the basic components or principles that should always be reminded is, for example, to avoid ambiguous or vague instructions. So first, you should be always reminded to always go back to the basics. Aside from going back to the basics, I think you should also never forget to always value the learner-centeredness, because I believe that society changed, and so is education, because change is inevitable. And throughout the history, we have shifted from having learners as passive to active recipients. And so we have to understand that what works for us as a student before may not work for our students in the future. So as we have learners, for example, as we have learners who have adapt in terms of media and in terms of digital technology, it is a good thing that we should utilize the digital space that may help them to have a meaningful learning experience. And lastly, I also realized, based on my observation, that my former mentors are lacking in terms of establishing rapport with their students. So I realized that maybe, aside from giving significance to teaching our subject matter, it is also vital that we know our students in a deep level structure. So I think that teaching is beyond teaching the content itself, but also let us allow ourselves as teachers to create an environment where their individuality as students are celebrated.
Okay, thank you, Abby. So learner centeredness, but at the same time, I like the idea of going back to basics. So now that you're continuing to learn how to teach, if you come to a point when when it gets really tough, okay, go back to the basics. Go back to the basics. Nicole.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Abby said. And to add up, I would like to cite 2 points to give to our viewers. First is to plan our game. Let us choose our decisions wisely, because it may be draining to work with various citations or resources. However, if you really know how you would put and integrate everything, it would be much easier for you to actually realize that it is the process that is really helpful for you. So, let's say in the near future, when you become a teacher, these processes will help you in probably creating a very, let's say, very good class.
Mm.
Yeah. So another point is to enjoy the process,
Yes.
because we are students,
Yes.
and there are times that we may be tired, or we may feel that we are demotivated. Actually, I really feel that most of the times I feel that I don't have the urge to do anything at this moment. So yeah, I won't do anything. However, we need to enjoy the moment, because enjoying the moment would give us a realization that what I am doing now is for myself.
Yes.
And I am enjoying it because it is for myself, and I am not doing it for the sake of grades, or for the sake of just complying with materials that needs to be passed at a certain time.
Okay.
So to really enjoy is to really appreciate your craft and your works.
Okay.
So that is all. To endure and to enjoy.
Yeah, but more apart from the enjoying, important to recognize that it is in the process that we also learn, not just from the learning resources, but the process or what we do with those resources, right? Thank you, Nicole. Laura, what do you want to tell your fellow teacher learners?
I think build on what Abby and Nicole said, the element of fun and adaptation, and I think that stems from accepting that I'm not sure if you would share this sentiment, that there's no perfect teacher. Because when I was younger, I said, oh, if I become a teacher, I'll be the best. There's no student will be bored when I teach, or there's no student will fail. But when I learned a lot about the course reflective pedagogy, it's really an art, and artists always make mistakes, and it's through those mistakes that they improve, because they learn how they can assess and how they can adapt through those failures. And I think another one is not to box yourself. I remember there was a time when we were asked what type of teacher you are, or what type of teacher you want to be: the passive technicians, reflective practitioners, and
Transformative.
Transformative intellectuals. And I said, can I be all of that? But
Why not?
I guess you can, because as Abby had said, different situations call for different solutions. So again, it depends on the diversity of the learners, and the maintenance of that element of fun, and also accepting that you can't always hit it the best way you wish. But yeah, just trying to improve, relearning and unlearning a lot of things in teaching. And I think trying to find out the best teacher that you are is like the second adolescence, because in adolescence we're trying to find ourselves. So it's another identity that we're forming as teachers.
Yes. Your teacher identity. Thank you, Laura. We can leave that question to our viewers. What kind of teacher do you want to become? Right? Okay, Matthew, what about your insights?
Ma'am, I'm gonna double down on what Laura said. I'm probably gonna add that to my list of quotations in my personal quote notebook. There is no perfect teacher. Let's all agree with that. Even the wisest of the philosophers, their own beliefs have their own specific flaws. And remember, as learning how to teach, we must remember that change is the only thing that is constant in life. That's how it is in the educational field. What works for today may not work for tomorrow. What worked before, it may not work now. That is the one thing that is constant in life and in education. But most importantly, all of us are students. Even as teachers, we are still students. We still continue to learn. I've written a blog about it. Are teachers still students, even though they teach? Even though they're professional teachers, practicing teachers. But before you become one, you have to be a student. And even if you already become one, you are still a student. Why? Because whether it be in a school or outside the class setting, as a teacher, you still teach. You still have that influence. And that is very powerful, especially for the youth. Indoctrination is a very powerful tool. Wear the shoes that your students are wearing. That's the first thing for me as an intangible. More so than how you plan the activities, that will follow, but you wear the shoes that your students are wearing. Does X work with his Y? Does the Z work with his M? There are numerous possibilities and variables that you have to take into consideration that makes teaching such a thrilling and meaningful experience. So one must understand first how his or her students learn best. From those variables, then you relate it to the curriculum in order to come up with a cohesive and effective plan, especially as teachers are humans at the end of the day. They all have their own beliefs. Naturally, your plan will not always work 100% of the time, but learning how students learn best will alleviate these mistakes. And maybe as an advice, if we can have the same intensity as learning the content with learning how our students learn best, that will, I believe, create the best teaching scenario. And always remember that for those that are still learning on how to become a teacher, you're always a student. Remember that in your mind. You always learn even as you're a teacher.
Yes. That's why PNU Talks tagline is saying, ang pagkatuto ay walang hanggan. Right? And Laura is saying teaching is an art, and Matthew is saying it's a thrilling experience. So it's an art and thrilling experience. What else would we still look for? What an exciting field we have chosen. Okay, let's listen to Marcy this time. Marcy, what's your message to your fellow teacher learners?
So I just want to say I just want to thank the other co-guests for bringing so much information to the table. It's very crunchy and substantial. So thank you. I also, for me, I always say to dig deeper and research more about the topics you will teach to the students, so you wouldn't do a disservice to them and to you as well. I think this kind of strategy, you will always look back on how you did as a student. And especially the students at first weren't aware how easy it was, but you are, because you're already a teacher. So I think one of the medicine to that is to do an oversimplification, but still the substance of the teachings are still there. So another is to make their learning experience worthwhile by creating engaging and interesting activities. I always comment that on our station because from my experience, the activities provided by my former English teachers weren't compelling. It wasn't engaging. And in hindsight, looking back on it, it's like a cycle of tedious work and assignments. So yeah, I think that's what we also have to focus on as future teachers. And now that we are usually branded as 21st century teachers, I think it's much better to maximize the technology around us, make the most of our accessible resources, and make sure you have lastly, make sure you have the innovative principles that will surely attract the students' attention, but all the while ensuring that learning is still taking place, that there is still a substantial information that they're digesting.
Okay, so dig deeper and take advantage of all the technology tools available for you, for your generation, for the generations to come. Oh my, the things coming from you are very, very good advice, which I hope your fellow teacher learners, and even teachers in practice, can learn a lot from. Finally, let's listen to Pat. Pat, what do you say to your fellow teacher learners?
My point would be in relation to set ideas of planning as a basis. Have your own exemplar, someone to follow, a model to follow. It could be a fictional character or a real teacher who have the values or characteristics that you or we are striving to achieve. And also I like the idea that teaching is a lifelong journey of learning. It continues. Today is different from tomorrow's teaching, and what we gather from all the experiences it becomes a pattern. It becomes our data set, or in a way, it becomes our spreadsheet that we can see our observations is there, and we have to apply it day to day because our future students, as pre-service teachers are not stereotypical or conventional characters. They are unique and
Yes.
they are individuals. Yeah.
Wow, listening to you, it makes me feel confident that we have a promising future in education, and that hopefully that approach to learning, that attitude will really, in the very near future, affect a lot of change in the field of education, not just for us, but for the Filipino learners. Oh my gosh, it makes me a bit sentimental, but I think that's all the time that we have for this episode. It was fun, it was insightful, another really, really engaging conversation with you. So, Abby?
Thank you for joining us in this PNU Talks episode.
Do you have related learning experiences like us?
Please feel free to share by commenting on this video post.
You can also post your questions and interact with fellow teachers and teacher learners.
Don't forget to hit the like button and share our episode.
See you again soon for more PNU Talks.